In July, Avengers Endgame became the top-grossing film of all time. The movie is the 22nd film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with nearly all of their other releases being ticket sales successes. It seems that ever since the Spider-Man trilogy featuring Tobey Maguire and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy in the early 2000s, that the superhero trend is only picking up steam. Given that virtually all superhero films are predicated on comic book stories, I was curious if comic book shops in Connecticut were feeling any sort of positive impacts of the superhero trend. I stopped by A Hero's Legacy, a comic book and collector item store in Manchester, to speak with longtime employee Scott Prentice in order to find out more. Scott, who has worked in comic book shops for decades, is a local expert about the comic book market.
Basically, there's more awareness of the characters than there ever has been. Like, if you walk down the street in 2008 and asked, 100 people who Tony Stark was, nobody would know. But now, I would think 99 out of 100 people know he's Iron Man. But it's just, it doesn't necessarily translate into sales for the comic book stores. It's like, sometimes there's like a window of like increased interest, like right before the movie starts, when there's like that kind of buzz period, when people are at fever pitch of anticipation. So that and maybe the week after the film opens, you might get a few extra sales in like trade paperbacks, or which are the collected editions of the comic books, or maybe back issues or first appearances or something like that. But all in all, it doesn't really translate into bigger sales across the board, week in, week out. There's just not a lot of, believe it or not, there's just so many comic book fans, and there's so many more movie fans that they just don't, there's no cross-pollination downward towards us, which is partly due to the fact that I think a lot of people don't know that comics still come out, on a weekly basis. There's a lot of TV shows that have comic books as the basis, as well as the movies we're talking about. And it wouldn't take a lot of effort to, at the end of each one of these shows say, oh, hey, if you want to read more about this character, go to your local comic store. And, but nobody really does that.
Given the ability of people to read comics online, I asked Scott if this had affected the store's bottom line.
There are people who have shifted entirely to some sort of digital way of reading the comics. Either they get them on Comixology, or they download them somehow, or I'm sure there's some illegal way to do it. I don't know anything. I'm not a tech person, but it's a minuscule portion that has been affected. And a lot of the guys that are super into the digital stuff, they still buy the physical copies too. They're just that huge fans, and they want to have a way to take it with them without having to lug a big pile of comics around. And it's a totally different experience too. I'm not saying it's better or worse to read a comic on an iPad or something, but it's a different, not as tactile experience. Some people crave that old, just interaction with a book or a piece of paper.
When I covered the Book Barn, a massive used bookstore in Niantic, I heard similar things. In spite of the public perception of the physical book being a fading commodity, there are still more than enough people who prefer physical books to digital alternatives. Scott did not think that online downloads, whether legally or otherwise, had played a role in sales. But I also asked him about it in terms of Japanese comics called manga. As the comics are published in Japan way before their eventual release in the United States, the medium seems ripe for online piracy.
I'm not convinced that the manga sales have ever been really that good. I mean, I think the publishers of the manga, whoever they are, have been trying to make them good by just throwing a lot of stuff at the market. But if you ever walk up and down the manga aisle at Barnes & Noble, it's just, kids sitting reading. They're not buying the stuff. And as a result, we don't carry a lot of manga because of that. There's so many different series. It's hard to tell what one is going to catch on. You're always going to guess wrong. And the market is kind of splintered so much that there's so many different interests. Like, kids who read Pokemon, aren't going to want to grow up and read, Love Hina or something.
At the same time that comic book-inspired films are making waves on the big screen, there are an increasing number of people reporting superhero fatigue, feeling uninterested in yet another superhero-related film. But given that Avengers Endgame made nearly $2.8 billion, I doubt the superhero trend is going anywhere soon. But regardless of that, Scott urged people to realize that there's more to comics than just superheroes.
Well, a lot of people just assume comics are about superheroes and that's it, and it's really not. I've always told people I think we're in a new golden age of comics in terms of the variety of subject matters that are being covered. There's just a lot of stuff out there. Comics is just the medium. It doesn't have to be about people dressed in garishly colored costumes and stuff.